Good morning. It's great to see everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Kay Cotan. I'm the Director of Equipping Vital Congregations. We're so happy that you're here. I know some of you came in teams. That's awesome. That's what we were looking for. So you're going to get excited. You're going to get a whole lot of information. And then you have a group to go back and start something. So we're just so pleased that you're here and you're thinking about new places for new people, specifically around fresh expressions. This morning, we're going to have a dive into what does it mean to be in a fresh expression and get an overview. For lunch, if those of you that registered for that, they'll be specifically around the fresh expression here at the Pajama Factory. And then we're going to do a deep dive this afternoon in once you started a fresh expression, what does it look like to develop that group? So we're just really excited that you're here. There will be opportunities for some grants that are coming up for those of you that need a little kickstart. So we'll go over that just before the lunch break and at the end of the day as well. Before I welcome our guest speakers today, could we have a word of prayer? Almighty and loving God, we're gathered here today to think about reaching your people in new ways. Let us be open to the Spirit moving. Let us be open to new ideas and new ways to share the gospel. God, we are so appreciative of the safe travels to get us here. Let us have a great time learning and searching our hearts for new ways forward to share the love and hope that you have shared with each of us. Give us strength. Give us attention. And be with us in this day. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I am so excited to introduce you to our two speakers today. Reverend Matt Lake is over here in the corner. He'll be leading you through. He's the pastor at First Williamsport. And with him is Mitch Marcello, who's in the back there. And Mitch is the director of their Acts network, which is a group of different fresh expression groups that they have developed out of First Williamsport. So they have been pioneers in doing fresh expressions, and they're going to be sharing their experiences with us throughout the day. So we're going to be able to learn from the folks that have been doing it. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you all. And could we greet our guests?
Okay. I'm good. Awesome. Great. Thanks, Kay. We are excited to have the opportunity to be here with you. Thanks for traveling to Williamsport. It's very nice for Mitch and I. We did not have to travel very far this morning. So those of you that did, thanks for making the trip. And our biggest prayer for you today is that you will find this time worthwhile and be able to take things back with you that you're going to be able to use in your setting. And Kay already opened us in a word of prayer, but I want to offer these words as really a prayer and blessing and hope for the day. From Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21, it says this. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations forever and ever. To him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. May his power be at work within us here today. That is our hope and prayer because we believe that there are some amazing opportunities that God has for us in the day and age and time in which we live. And that's a lot of what we're going to jump into here this morning. And so just to kind of give you a very quick overview of a couple things, we want to make sure today that before you go, these are some of the things we're going to be focusing on, making sure that you get some kind of understanding of what we're even talking about with fresh expressions. And admittedly, this morning is going to be a little bit more content heavy. As the day goes on, we're increasingly going to have interactive elements and then work on things, tools that we'll be able to take with us. My commitment to you is I will jump all in with you. One of the things that we know is that we get out what we put in. So I just want to ask for your attention. You've given up a Saturday to come and be here. We want to take full advantage of that time and do that to the best that we can. So I invite you to just kind of jump in here with me and to do that. Again, we're going to look at ways to get started with Fresh Expressions, and we want to literally begin to map out possibilities. So we want to do way more than give information. We want to have things that we can walk away with and really literally begin to put into place. As we get ready to do that, one of the first things I would say to you is when it comes to Fresh Expressions, one of the biggest things for any of us is being able to pay attention to our context. And that's literally one of the reasons that we're meeting here this morning. We're not meeting in a normal church building. We're not meeting in a church basement. We're not meeting in a church fellowship hall. This is literally a facility in the community. That's a large part of what happens in Fresh Expressions, learning to meet people on their turf, develop relationships, eventually move into elements of faith and even church. So if this feels a little different from a normal church gathering, that's intentional. And just to literally be here in a different space gets us thinking in some different ways. So recognizing the context that we're in is incredibly important. I know a couple of you, but I don't know a lot of you. So I want to give you a little bit of sense of my context. And first of all, here's some of my context. These are my kids. That is Zach on the left, Alex in the middle, Josh on the right. Alex will be 17 next month. Please pray for me, all right? Alex just started driving a couple months ago. Please pray for me. That would be great. Alex has had a boyfriend for a number of months. Please pray for me. That would be great. She is a great kid. We're really blessed. She actually, I never got to do something like this. Here in Williamsport, if you were in the orchestra or in choir or in the band, once every 4 years, they take a trip to Disney. Literally for 4 days, they play for an hour of music somewhere down there, and the rest of the time they're exploring the parks. Alex has been in Disney this past week. She gets back later today. So that is our daughter, Alex. Josh on the right there with the red backpack straps, he is our most chill kid. In fact, sometimes I want to reach in and turn up his intensity meter a little bit. I look at him and he's just got so many physical gifts. He plays soccer, he plays football. And we were very blessed. Josh came into our life when he was 28 days old, and he's been such a blessing to us, as God often does. The plan did not work out exactly as we expected. When Josh came into our life at 28 days old, my wife Jen was 7 months pregnant with Zach, who's also up there. And, so they, for all practical purposes, they are our twins. And maybe not your normal twins, but they are our twins. And then Zach there in the white t-shirt, as quiet and chilled out as Josh is, Zach is the opposite. And so sometimes we want to turn down his intensity meter a little bit. He also loves sports. His number one favorite sport is basketball. He was the point guard this year for the 8th grade team. And I have to say, one thing I've done that I'm pretty proud of as a parent, there's not too many things, but all of my kids, every single one of them, are major Duke basketball fans. All of them. And they've lived for another day, any of you that follow that. So I'm really grateful for that. Those are our kids, and we're incredibly grateful and blessed to have them in our life. That is part of my context. Here's also a large part of my context. This is my wife, Jen, and I wish that she could be here with me, but Jen has some other obligations today. But I love to share Jen whenever I can and wherever I can. I love Jen a lot. And this year I'm very blessed. We will celebrate our 20th anniversary in June, which is really hard to believe. Jen has a deep passion for children, for orphans, specifically working in adoptive and foster care environments. In fact, she literally has just started a legit nonprofit called Dwell Orphan Care. It literally started in January. And it's blowing up in a wonderful way that we're really excited about. And she's increasingly giving all of her time as the executive director for Dwell Orphan Care here in Lycoming County. And I'm just super, super proud of her for that. That is part of my context. The other part of my context is this. Some of you know me, but I just want to give you a tiny bit of background story. Right now, I'm serving as the lead pastor here in Williamsport at First Church. And right now, we are what we define ourselves as a dual expression of church. And here's what that means, and you're going to hear more about this throughout the day. That means that we are absolutely committed to doing the best worship experiences that we can on Sunday morning in a gathered setting with what most of us are familiar with when we talk about worship. We make it the best that we can. We continue to invest in it. That will continue. We're unashamed about that. At the same time, we are increasingly committed in an equal way to being a sent church, which means we are learning to live into these fresh expressions that we're going to be talking about here this morning. So that means that we have all of our folks who gather on Sunday mornings for the normal worship services, but we increasingly have groups that are meeting out in the community in different places to live into being church, never expecting those people to walk through our doors on Sunday morning. So just to give you an idea of what that means for us, since we started really diving into this, and Mitch will touch on this more later, Mitch is our primary person working with the Sent side of our church. But right now, we've had about 7 groups that have started in the community and then stopped. They didn't work out over the long term. We're okay with that. There's a season for everything. There's also a strong element of not only creativity, but experimentation when it comes to starting these fresh expressions. So I don't want you thinking everything we've tried to do, oh, it's all magically working out. Not the case. Having said that, we currently have about 8 groups that are going right now. And among those 8 groups, there's roughly what we would say 250 people in orbit somehow connected with those people, or connected with those groups. Those are people who are not connected with the rest of First Church in any way. They're not part of our worship attendance or anything like that. And we're expecting another 4 or 5 as we go throughout 2019 to develop. So that's literally just a little bit of who we are in that. The other thing I'd want to say to you this morning is I'd love to stand here and say, oh, I was praying deeply one day. I mean, how did you start in this direction of being a dual expression of church? I would love to say, Matt, in his wisdom and in his depth of faith, thought, wouldn't this work really well? And I courageously led our people in this direction. It was nothing like that. Here in a nutshell is how that began. About 5 years ago now, I'd have to look at the exact date, I received a phone call from a seminary student saying, hey, I have to do a class project. He was in a church growth and church New Start kind of program in seminary, and he said, I don't want to just do a project that's going to get filed away in a drawer. I'd like to do something that might be a real possibility. Would it be okay if we used you guys as a case study? I was like, sure, why not? I mean, what is it going to hurt? I mean, he's going to do some extra evaluation of us, and I was like, there's no harm in that. And one of the things that we discovered is that Williamsport is probably not going to be the place where you build a large facility and 1,000 or 2,000 people magically start to come. We're not Chicago, we're not another large city, but what we did discover is that what if you could reach 1,000 people by having 100 groups of 10 in micro communities? At the time, that's what we were calling it. It's like, why not? I mean, maybe that's a possibility. And so literally, that was how we began. Now that seminary student, many of you know him, his name is Chris Sledge. And so Chris was really the first one that kind of planted that idea with us. And I was really grateful because he began that journey, helped us begin that journey. He was a catalyst in that way. Then I've also been grateful. We've worked with Paul Nixon. He has coached us at different places. Been super grateful for his influence and his input, really giving us permission to be creative and to explore. And we've been super blessed as well by Fresh Expressions US and just the teaching and learning that we've gotten from them. So I share that with you to say, we feel so blessed by the people who have invested in us. And so I can't stand here and say, hey, listen to us and listen to me and all the great things we've figured out. We are blessed, and we are just trying to respond to where we believe God is leading us and nudging us. And so that is all. I just share that with you. That's part of our context and kind of how we're understanding ourselves, and I want you to understand that for us here this morning as well. Now here's what I want to do for just a moment. Throughout our time together, we invite you to be asking questions. Feel free to interrupt. We're going to create space for questions, and again, we'll give more and more time as the day goes on. But as we start this morning, I want to begin really with a very easy question for you. I want to make a very obvious statement to you, and that is this. The world today is different than 1950. All right? Like, aren't you glad you came here for that just amazing piece of information, right? So we know that. But here's what I want to ask you to do, like literally in 20 seconds, just call out a couple ways. What are some specific ways that the world is different today than 1950, and especially when it comes to the life of church? What is different today, different dynamics than in 1950? Just a couple. What's that? Yeah, so lots less people in church. That's exactly right. That used to be very common to be in church every week. Fewer and fewer percentage-wise are. Thank you. What else? Absolutely. Media, technology, it's absolutely incredible to me. You can be halfway around the world and instantaneously share what's going on, and we can know in this part of the world what is occurring. I was kind of amazed. I'm in a doctoral program right now, and I was shocked a number of months ago we meet every week via Zoom. Okay, that's not a big deal. But the one week, it just struck me, my professor was on a plane that was going, leading the class while the rest of us were scattered around the country. Phenomenal. Like, I'm a pretty simple person. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. So yes, technology and social media, vastly different. What else?
People have to make a choice on Sundays between bringing their kids to church.
Yes.
And football or cheerleading.
You've got to make a choice. It used to be Sunday morning was only church stuff, and we had sort of this reserved corner of society. No longer. When I was growing up, I think I had heard of something like travel basketball or travel sports. Now that's a norm. And like for us in our own family, navigating that with my own kids of where are they going to be? And it's not just sports, it's music, it's travel, it's vacation, it's being sick, it's work, it's 100 other things. It's exactly right. No longer is Sunday morning reserved just for church. Just a couple other quick ones. What else? Absolutely. So she said single parent families, but the family unit looks very different than what it did all of those years ago and what we think of with family. Yep. What else? Yeah.
More cultural diversity.
Absolutely. There's more cultural diversity among folks, and not only more cultural diversity that we notice, but there's these overlapping of cultures increasingly meshing together in all kinds of ways. That's right. How about one more? Because we could go on a long time, but one more. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, God, okay, yeah, so the focus on God in any way in a more public sphere is increasingly less and less. One of the ways I like to think about that is it used to be that if you did not show up in church on Sunday morning, there was a decent chance your boss on Monday morning might ask where you were. Now, right, now that sounds absolutely crazy to us now, but it's true, it used to be that way. So that's exactly right, you've got it, you understand that the world is incredibly different. Now here's what I want to ask you to do, keeping all of that in mind. Say it's 1950 and you want to sell an automobile and you're going to do anything you can to sell your automobile over somebody else's. Here's a very typical advertisement to sell an automobile. What do you notice as the way that they're going about to try to sell their automobile here? Yes, right. So lots of words. And again, we could dive into this, but the idea was, especially in 1950, to get someone to buy your product, give as much information as you can about the product. And if you give more information, better information, then you hope people are going to buy your product. That was very normal in 1950. Now, I want to ask you to watch a commercial from not this year, but last year's Super Bowl on trying to sell a vehicle. And I want you to pay attention to how it's different now than it was then in 1950 of trying to sell an automobile, and see what you think.
Come on, we gotta get out of here. Must go faster. How do you like it now, my friend?
Would you like to take it for a test drive?
I just did.
Oops. I love that commercial. I could watch it every time. It cracks me up. But so just real quick, what was different there than the 1950 version of doing an advertisement? Showed you. That's right. I heard someone say performance. Exactly. Right. You got it. In this, yeah. In the second commercial, there were hardly any words. There was hardly any information. We want you to experience this. And if you experience it, we trust that you'll want to be part of it. I would submit to you that even though the world has changed vastly since 1950, we in the church often have not. And increasingly, what we continue to do is just like 1950. Let us tell you information about our church, when we're open, what preacher we have, what programs we do. And we hope that information will pull you in. Except in a world that wants an experience over information, we are increasingly losing ground. And the ironic part is, they're doing all of this to sell an automobile. Who has the greatest story to share and experience in the universe? The people of God. What is more beautiful than the grace, the truth, the beauty, the splendor, the majesty, the love of God? And we've reduced it to this static, information-producing thing instead of an experience to live into. Now, you know this, but I just want to share this with you because it's just striking to me. Every single year, without exception, since 1968, the United Methodist Church has lost members. What that means is that in 1968, there were 10.7 million members in the United Methodist Church. By 1984, that number had dropped to 9.2 million. By 2016, it had dropped to under 7 million people. Here's what that means. It's the equivalent of losing a 318-member church every single day for a year. You know that, but please hear that. That's more and more people in our church not experiencing the love, the grace, the beauty, the truth of Jesus Christ. I told you a little bit ago that I'm a part of a doctoral program. It's with Lynn Sweet. It's based out of Portland Seminary. It's focused on semiotics and future studies, which I didn't know what semiotics were. Basically, it's the study of signs, so looking at the signs Jesus used to read his culture, but to share in a way that people would understand the message of God. So this past summer, we were in England. We were in Cambridge, which was awesome at many levels. And when we were there, Len Sweet told us a story. He said he had been there a couple years ago, and his daughter had come over to visit with him. And the one day they were there, and Len said, "What would you like to do today?" And his daughter said, "I'd love it if we could go to Westminster Abbey." So Len said, "Great, let's do that." So they woke up the one morning. It was a Wednesday morning. They went to Westminster Abbey. There was a line out the door. You had to wait about an hour and a half to get in. And you had to pay about £15, so roughly $20 to get in. Now, if you know Len, not the most patient of people, and he looked at that line, he said, "We are not doing this." He said, "We will come back later." So they did. They came back on Sunday morning during the actual worship time, like when there was really a worship service going on. There was no line. You didn't have to pay to get in. They walked in, and in this massive facility, Westminster Abbey, there were about 150 people. 50 of them were in the choir. Another 50 were individuals who had come thinking it was a normal tour day. When they discovered it was worship, they left. And the remaining 50 were there to actually worship as part of the congregation. And Len was sharing that with us, and he was kind of saying to us, "What do you think about that?" And there's a part of us that's like, we just want to kind of moan and be like, "Oh man, like there it is again, like religion's just declining in the world, and people don't care about God and all these things," and we just tended to want to complain. And Len kind of stopped us a little bit, and he said, "Well, I understand some of those dynamics are going on," but he's like, "Why do you think the rest of the week people would pay and wait in line for a tour, but they won't come for free on a Sunday morning to worship?" And two things that he pointed out to us I found to be really helpful were this. He said, number one, when they come to pay for a normal tour during the week, they are paying for a tour guide that is going to literally walk with them step by step through every step of the journey to experience all that there is here to experience. And he said, number two, you are going to pay the tour guide. They're going to help make the history of that place relevant to you. I wonder how often we in the church, we as followers of Jesus Christ, are actively walking along step by step with other individuals so they can experience the love of Christ to the fullest degree, and at the same time making the history, making the story of Christ relevant to us. Because again, I think what we've tended to do is say, let us shove information at you, but we're not going to walk with you, and we're not going to help make this experience relevant to you. Now, I share all that because Fresh Expressions is really about walking with people in their space to experience the love of God to the fullest degree, and to help them walk in such a way that eventually they come to understand, why is Jesus relevant to them? That's what this is about that we're talking about here this morning. And I am absolutely convinced that people want this experience. It's not that people don't want to worship anymore. It's not that people don't have a love of God anymore. It's that in the churches, they're not finding God to be relevant because we've made God static and about information rather than all-dimensional in the experience of the loving God. And I think if we can see this in this way, for me this is helpful. Maybe this isn't helpful to you, but this is personally for me something I've enjoyed doing. Out of curiosity, I Googled the top stories that were Googled in 2017, so 2 years ago. And that means these are stories that people actively wanted to check out on their own more information about or to understand it better. So in 2017, here are 4 of the top stories. That was the year that dealt with Bitcoins. That was the first time that Trump met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. That's when the immigration issue really came on the radar. That was also the year that the Las Vegas shooting happened. That's 4 of the top stories that were Googled, people saying, I want to understand more about this. Also that year, 4 more of the stories were this. 4 different hurricanes: Maria, Jose, Harvey, Irma. Now, that's 8 of the top 10 stories that people want to understand more about in 2017. Those are what I would describe as negative stories. However, there were 2 other stories that year that cracked the top 10. One was this. It was the year of the solar eclipse. And you might remember it came in our country. It was sort of up in Oregon, Washington, and it slowly descended down across the country and exited out. I think it was South Carolina that year. I drastically underestimated what people would do with the solar eclipse. People drove hours to get in line with the solar eclipse. I talked to a friend from here who drove hours to Tennessee, and he said they got to this little tiny Tennessee town, and the roads were backed up, and the hotels were all filled up, and I'm like, to see an eclipse? Like, I was trying to put it all together, and it took me a while to understand, what are people doing here? They wanted to get as close as they could to a sense of the majesty and awe and beauty and splendor as they could. So much so, they were willing to drive many hours to get as close as they could. That tells me people still long for something greater than themselves. They long to be drawn into splendor and majesty and something that will make their jaw drop. That happened here with the solar eclipse. Here's the other story that year. Anybody remember April the giraffe? Now that's when she was having her first giraffe. I think she's up to number 5. Did I just see? I think it's number 5. But this is the first one. And I grew up on a farm. You have to understand. I saw animals be born all the time, and they're cute. But I'm like, what is the big deal and infatuation with this giraffe and April and everything else? I think people still long for innocence and new life. And there was something about this little creature being born in a humble way that drew people to the story. Do you all know any other story where there's a humble one born in very meager means and in a humble way in an out-of-the-way place? And here's what's even more interesting. Somebody reminded me appropriately so with this, with giraffe, with April. It was one of the first times there were cameras on this situation 24/7, which meant you could be part of the story of the new birth. My goodness, church. We are part of a culture that wants to be part of new birth and new life. Who has more of an opportunity to do that than us? And again, this is what Fresh Expressions is all about. Helping people, again, encounter the majesty and the splendor and the awe of God in a very real way, experiencing new life in maybe meager places or out-of-the-way places or unexpected places, and helping them to move in that direction. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about Fresh Expressions. Now, as we're going through this, you've got notes there and slides, and they're going to match up pretty carefully, but I'll just tell you, some of them will be a little bit different, a little bit out of the way in some different places. So just be aware of that as we're going through here. The other thing that I wanted to share with you this morning, those of you that like definitions, we will give you this definition to use. When we're talking about fresh expressions of ministry, what exactly is that? We would describe it as a form of church for our changing culture, established primarily for the benefit of people who are not yet members of any church. There's a couple things I want to point out with that. Again, we've just been talking about the changing culture. You're pretty aware of that and how that's occurring. I mention that, and I want to emphasize that, because one of the abilities that I think we've lost in the church is our ability to read our context and respond appropriately. So the reason I just went through that example with you about the top stories I Googled in 2017, we could do the same thing for 2018 actually. It just gives us a sense of where people are, what they're looking for, what they're searching for, and that then gives us clues on how we can respond and what that means and looks like for us. So Fresh Expressions is a form of church for our changing culture, but again, it's established primarily for the benefit of people who are not yet members of any church. These are people not walking through our doors right now, and let me be very clear. What we're saying is we're not expecting them to come and to walk through our doors on a Sunday morning. For many people, many places, many churches, that's a real hiccup. I'm willing to try this, but the end result better be, I better see somebody walking through our doors here on Sunday morning, otherwise we're not going to be about it. The irony in that to me is, because sometimes I get this question, I will often look at local churches and I'll say, does your church support any foreign missionaries in any regard? And the vast majority of churches are like, oh yeah, and they're even like proud of how they support foreign missionaries. And then I'll say to them, and how often does your foreign missionary come and report to you on Sunday morning and bring all the people that they're working with? Of course, that never happens. Maybe once a year, if you're fortunate, when they're back doing recruiting and support raising and all of those things. So in that setting, we're totally fine to support something that we don't see people walking through our doors. But when it comes to them Fresh Expressions and a local ministry focus, there we seem to struggle. So I want to be really clear that when we're talking about Fresh Expressions, it's this idea we're not expecting them to walk through our doors on a Sunday morning. So really what we're trying to do is to figure out, and all of us do this as ministry leaders, how is it that we connect with people in the culture and the day in which we live? How do we connect the church with the people and where they are? So just to kind of give you an illustration, every single church faces the same question or same dilemma. Here's the church, there's this gap, and then there's people in our world and culture. How do we cross the gap so that we can connect and share the love of Christ with people who are not yet in our church? As far as I can tell, there's really only one of three ways that we can answer this question. The first one is this, and it's the one that we are most familiar with. We will adopt, and I'm just going to put some categorical names on it. You can change the names if you want. But we adopt basically an attractional paradigm. That is to say, we open the doors and we invite people to come and be a part of our worship experience, and we hope they will come. Let me say, as I go through, I'm going to give you three ways of understanding here of this whole idea of connecting the church with people in our culture. One is not better than another. Please hear me when I say that. You'll probably hear this repeatedly from me throughout the day. I'm not saying to you Fresh Expressions are better than what we do on Sunday morning. They're of equal value, but it's not better. I want you to hear that from me. I am a lead pastor. I love every single person who joins us on Sunday morning. Love them. I also love the people who are not yet joining us on Sunday morning. So as I'm going through this, don't hear this as a negative option. The reality is, attractional church has reached a lot of people. I am the product of an attractional church. When I grew up, we went to church on Sunday morning and there were things there that drew me there. They had a good youth group. They had a good preacher. There were people that I liked there, all of those kinds of things. The idea with an attractional church is you produce something good and you hope that people will come and join you on your turf to experience it better. The only problem is this. Usually the way we go about with an attractional church is we invite people in this way. Hey, why don't you come to our church? We have the best preacher in town. Or come to our church, we have the best praise team or the best choir or the best youth program in town. That's all well and good, but what do you do when you say to someone, come to our church on Sunday morning, we have the best preacher in town, and they look at you and they say, what's a preacher? Oh, we have the best choir in town. What's a choir? There's a group that gets up and sings, and you kind of join them, or you kind of walk. We have the best praise team in town. So how exactly is that like a concert? We have the best youth program in town. Oh, well, how's that different than a lot of the programs going on at the high school or the elementary? I mean, what do you do? And so my point is that increasingly in our world, this idea of attractional, that if you just open the doors and expect people to come, has less and less influence because you've already named it. There are other things going on a Sunday morning. There is greater competition. Honestly, there's just less relevancy for people about this whole church thing, especially when we make it about information and not formation or experience. And so in our culture, there's increasingly less focus or ability to find attractional church to be effective, which is why, since the church hasn't changed since 1950 very much, it's why every year without exception since 1968, we've seen a decline in our membership. Not saying this is bad, I'm saying it's increasingly having less effect. And so for us who grew up in this, what else are we gonna do? How else are we gonna connect with people? And many of us, in our desperation, don't wanna do anything. But if you know the definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing over and over and over and expect different results. We're not seeing different results. So this still has effect in our life, in our world and culture. Don't hear me saying is don't do this at all. It just has less effect. That's one way. A second way is that we can adopt what we would call an engaged model of church. And in this understanding, we're saying, you know what, we will leave our doors on Sunday morning. We'll meet you on your turf. We'll come to you. We want to build a relationship with you, and then we'll bring you back across the bridge so that you'll join us on our turf in church. Now, I should pause and say one other thing here because I find this interesting. In churches, we often say, oh, we're so hospitable. We want everyone to come and be here. We're here for everyone. And yet the irony is this. We're saying, hey, we love you. Come join us. But come join us at the hour we've established in the style we like on our turf. That doesn't sound overly hospitable to me, but that's, we say we're hospitable, but come to us in our style at our time. Okay. In this engaged model, we're saying, we'll come to you. We will. We'll get to know you. But the goal is now, because we know you, we hope you'll trust us enough and you will come back across the bridge and join me for normal worship on Sunday morning. This can be and is effective too. So in my setting, we do this in a variety of ways. Our Vacation Bible School functionally acts like this. We meet with our kids. It's a wide community event. There are hundreds of kids who come, kids who we never get to connect with at any other time. We trust and pray as we get to know them, build a relationship with them. Their families will trust us so that when we invite them, they'll come and join us in worship on Sunday morning. We celebrate that. We try to do that. We do something here every year called Transform. We literally have our folks in our church go out into our community, into people's homes, and basically do mission projects. So we work on porches, we do repairs, etc. So now we're literally sitting in people's homes for a week, serving them, loving them. We hope as we get to know them, then they'll trust us. And we can say, hey, it's been really good getting to know you this week. We'd love to see you and worship with us on Sunday morning. Just last weekend, we had another one. We had an event called Jumpin' Jesus. And again, it was in one of our facilities, but it was really a community event. Again, hundreds of kids who came, and kind of a blowout event with the blow-up stuff that you bring in to bounce houses and all that kind of stuff. We use as an opportunity, again, to build relationships. So to say, hey, will you come and join us Sunday morning? This is not bad. We do it. We try to live into it. However, we're still saying to them, we want you to come and join us on our turf at our time in our style. What we're talking about with Fresh Expressions, though, is this idea. It's something that we would call incarnational. And the idea here is that we're going to join you on your turf, and guess what? We're going to stay here with you. We're going to figure out how to build relationship, how to build community, how to eventually move into some discipleship, and eventually experience church in this setting. And you may have a lot of questions about how that actually works. We're going to unpack that for you throughout the day. But the idea here is that when we come and join you on your turf, it's not with the idea that once we get to know you well enough, we're going to pull you off your turf to come and join us on Sunday morning. That doesn't mean in these situations that somebody, as they get to know us, might say, hey, you know what, I do want to come and join you on Sunday morning. It's to say that's not our intent. Now, here's what's really interesting to me. When you think about the life of Jesus, which of these three models do you see him doing most often? Yeah. In fact, just do me a favor. Think about the life of Jesus. Just call out, where are different places that Jesus met people? Just call them out. At a well, yep, where else? At a well, yep, where else? Fishing on a boat, yep, where else? Marketplace, in their homes, that's exactly right. Where else? Wilderness, that's right. Where else? Roads, yep. Hillside. Yeah, hillside. Right. He is all over the place. And don't forget, he also was in the temple area, right? So he was at the attractional place too, but he was also in all of these other places. One of the things that Mitch will talk about with you is the idea of formal discipleship versus informal discipleship. We see Jesus way more often living into this form of ministry. And yet, what we've done in church is we've created this isolated thing that we do on Sunday mornings, almost independent from the rest of culture, instead of out in culture. Fresh Expressions is learning to embrace this model that we have here before you. So those of you that like some specific definitions and different characteristics, let me just lift a couple of those up. When it comes to Fresh Expressions, there is a strong ministry focus. There is a willingness to reimagine and to play and to experiment and to be creative and to say all of those are a good thing. There is a commitment to say that this is a wonderful form of being church along with existing forms of being church. And again, I want to lift both of those up to you here this morning and advocate the validity of both. But what I would suggest to you is this. With our own staff, I liken it to whenever you have one child, what do you do with child number one? Take all kinds of pictures and you fill the photo books and all that kind of stuff. And then child number two comes along and you struggle to give them the same amount of attention. Although, let's say that you have a child and let's say they're 5 years old and then you have another child. What do you do when the second child is born? I mean, proportionally with your time, what do you have to do with the second child? You got to spend a lot more time with the second child because they can't do anything for themselves. I mean, they can't eat, they can't bathe without you helping them. The 5-year-old can do at least some things by themselves. Now, if you give more attention at the beginning to the newborn, does it mean you love the 5-year-old any less? No. You just have to give the newborn a different focus because it's a newborn. And that's kind of what we're doing here with Fresh Expression, is to say we don't love the attractional church any less. We've got to give more focus and attention here this morning and just in general to this newer child of the Fresh Expression. Except here's what I would say to you. This is not a reinvention, it is a reclaiming. Because if you go back to Scripture, and this is one of my favorite things about Fresh Expressions. This is not a new fad. This is not a new program. It's a reclaiming of Scripture. It's a reclaiming of what we see in the gospel. And to me, that is incredibly, incredibly important. So I want us to be really clear about all of those things. A couple other characteristics. They're often connected to existing churches. So it's finding the right level of giving them freedom and flexibility and autonomy, but still holding them connected to another church or the church somehow. That can get a little tricky, and we can talk later about it if you want, of what are some of the tethers that gives them flexibility and freedom but still keeps them connected to the wider church. There's, again, a clear orientation to the unreached. So let's just hypothetically say that you all decide you want to do this, and you have a dinner church idea, and you promote it in your church, and 50 people start coming to your dinner church, but nobody from the community comes. That's not what you want to do. In fact, there'll probably be some people in your church who are all excited about this, but it's not for them. It's for those not yet connected to church in any way. It's generally outside the walls of your traditional church facility, not always, but most of the time. The exception would be if you have a church facility that acts as a community facility at the same time. It can happen within your building, but most of the time, if you're talking about what's a Fresh Expression, it's meeting in what we would call a third space, another place in town that people congregate and come to at different times. Remember, it's to engage people who are never going to come to our building on our own. These are usually smaller in scale. We have nothing against larger size things, but we kind of like to use the language that it's small enough that you can throw that party and kind of know everybody's name. There's a level of intimacy there and familiarity with each other that is helpful. Sometimes people say, isn't this just another form of a small group? And I would say to you, no, for a couple reasons. One, small group, we can say what we want about our small groups. 98% of the time, it's almost all Christians in our small groups. And yes, we can invite a non-Christian into our small group, but how comfortable do you think a non-Christian is going to feel coming by themselves into a group where everybody else is a Christian? That happens some, but not a whole lot. Secondly, when you get together in a small group, you have no intent of ever doing worship by yourself. You're still in a small group going to come back on Sunday morning with the rest of the wider group. That's not the case when it comes to Fresh Expressions. So we're not talking about small groups here. And then, just these elements as well, that a local faith community, it has the potential to become a mature expression of church, but please remember, it may not look like our notion of church. We're not talking about church light. We're not talking about church JV. We're talking about a totally different form where the same elements of worship and prayer and fellowship and those things might happen, but it's not going to look like what we do on Sunday morning. And we have to be okay with that. And lastly, in the midst of all of that, having an attentiveness to a microclimate or environment with a group of people with similar interests and passions. Here's the beautiful thing to me about Fresh Expressions. They can get into the niches of our society. They can get into those crevices that we can't get to on our own on Sunday morning. So you can be with people at the park who are runners or are dog walkers, or you can be with skiers, or you can be at the pub, or you could be at the rugby field. You fill in the blank. Places that our Sunday morning gathering can't seem to get to. Fresh Expressions get into those spaces and places. So here's what I want to do with you. I'm going to show you this real quick. In just a moment, I'm going to show you a video. The video is going to be a verbal description of what you see here. And this lights process is the process that Kay and her team in particular have worked on putting together for us in our conference. We're going to dig into this way deeper this afternoon, but I'm showing it to you now because I want you to have an understanding and an overview of, okay, how does this actually work? How does this begin to occur? What does that look like? And the idea is that you follow each one of the elements of the lights, an acronym there. So listen, you're just obviously going to be listening to your community. And I'll just say to you, we're awful at listening. We are horrible listeners. We're bad. We think we know the needs of a community, but we rarely stop and listen to the needs of the community or the nudgings of the Holy Spirit. Once we have listened, then we'll have insight in how we can meet the needs in our community by loving and serving. We do that, and when that happens, there's going to be an element of igniting that's occurring there. Once that happens, people are going to start to gather around the loving and serving, and as they gather, community is going to start to be built. As the community continues to be built and gets stronger and stronger and deeper, they will be heightened to the awareness of God in such a way that you can move in the direction of discipleship. And once you've started to do that, then it's not just a heightened awareness of God, but people in their own spiritual lives can begin to thrive in their walk with God. And once that's happening, the whole thing can start over again and just spread and spread and spread. So I want to show you a video here this morning that Kay and her team have put together that describes that process and just starts to put in your mind how we would go about living into and forming a fresh expression of
The Bishop has challenged all of us to create a fresh expression of church. What's a fresh expression? A fresh expression is about creating a church to reach new people in new places in new ways. How we do this is by, first of all, we think about taking the church outside the four walls of the sanctuary to connect with people who don't currently have a church home. Statistics tell us that 20% of Americans attend church regularly. There's another 40% who say they would attend if invited, but that still leaves 40% of people who, for whatever reason, are not going to set foot in a traditional church setting. So fresh expressions are designed to reach this 40% of people. How we do this is through a process called Ignite the Lights. LIGHTS is an acronym that stands for the 6 phases that fresh expressions go through as they grow over time. Let's begin with the first phase, which is listen. You want to begin by listening to the needs of the community. What could the church look like if you took it outside the four walls of your sanctuary and met people where they're at in your community? This is like you're holding a tinderbox, considering where to start a new fresh expression fire in your community. It's thinking about what work is God already doing here and how can you partner with God to be a part of this work in your community. The second phase is to invest. This is loving and serving the people you hope to start a fresh expression in their midst. In this phase, it's like you're holding a match, getting ready to start a new fresh expression in your community. The third stage is to gather. This is where we focus on gathering the people who will be a part of your Fresh Expression. It can be fairly simple to gather people around a common interest, like gardening or running or a book club, but it can be more difficult to help build intentional relationships among the people who are part of your Fresh Expression. So in this phase, you want to invest in community so that it will become a life-giving experience to those who gather in your Fresh Expression. The fourth phase is heightened discipleship. Discipleship is at the heart of a Fresh Expression. Like we said, it can be fairly easy to gather people around a common interest, but it can be harder to build those intentional relationships and help introduce people to Jesus. So let's take running as a common interest. Maybe you start running with some of your neighbors in your neighborhood, and then eventually over time you say, hey, I'd love to pray with any of you who'd love to just spend some time in prayer. Maybe eventually you start talking about a brief passage of scripture or sing worship songs together. However you introduce discipleship will look unique to your individual Fresh Expression context, but this is the heart of a Fresh Expression and helps spark people come to know and follow Jesus. The fifth phase is thrive. In this phase, it's the goal of every Fresh Expression to become its own worshiping community, that you are creating a community that meets regularly to foster spiritual growth. Now, this could look really different than 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning church service. Instead, it might look like 7 p.m. at a local bar, or 10 a.m. every other Saturday at a community space, or every third Wednesday at a church fellowship hall or in somebody's home. It can look very different, but what matters the most is that this community has become church for the people who are coming, and that's how you know that you have arrived at a Fresh Expression of faith. Now the last and final phase is spread. In this phase, you have started a Fresh Expression and you are raising up new leaders, and you're commissioning them out to go and start their own Fresh Expressions in new places. Or maybe you raise up a leader in your own Fresh Expression and you encourage them to take over the leadership of your Fresh Expression so that you can go start a new Fresh Expression someplace else. What is important is that you are creating a network of Fresh Expressions that you can pass the torch on to someone else to help more and more people come to know and follow Jesus. So remember, Fresh Expressions are about creating new places for new people, and you can do this through Journey. So we encourage you to begin this journey of igniting the lights to create a Fresh Expression to help more people come to know and follow Jesus.
The Acts Network is one of our ways at First Church to intentionally create faith communities outside of the traditional walls that we have grown accustomed to worshiping in and doing ministry in. And so we intentionally work with leaders who are willing to go out into the community and build faith communities in their workplace, in their homes, anywhere that they really feel that they are able to potentially connect with those who are far away from the church or far away from God. As a community group matures, there are 5 aspects that are slowly incorporated in order for them to be called a worshiping community. One is prayer, another is communion, the message, discipleship, and giving. As these 5 elements are incorporated into a community of faith, they will be seen as a growth of First Church and a multiplying experience where believers and non-believers are able to worship in a unique setting. I'd say the greatest need that the Acts Network currently has are more leaders that are willing to step outside of their comfort zone, really to create different communities and to invite boldly people that are far away from their faith in their lives, to be doing that more. As we learn how to do that as a church, the gospel will be spread.
It has helped me to grow immensely because of the diversity of people I've experienced lots of opportunities for people to open up and talk about their struggles. That's something that helps us grow as a community and as friends.
Y'all got to try this new church. This is great. You can enjoy yourself. You can talk about the Lord. You can give your experience and strength and hope to the ones around you.
The reality of North American church is that each year more and more churches are closing, and the percentage of believers here in America are becoming less and less. It's the responsibility of every Christian to find ways to present the gospel to the world around them, in whatever circle, whatever network that they are a part of. And the Acts network is one of the ways that we are, again, trying to intentionally engage culture with the gospel. And if the church is not willing to explore different ways to present Jesus to those who do not know him, then we are going to miss the opportunity to see lives changed from the inside out.
So I'm showing you that this morning in no way to say, hey, do it like that. I don't know how you are, but I work best if you give me an example and it starts to stimulate my imagination and I can build off of that. So I'm just showing you that to say, here's a possibility in our setting when you begin to contextualize the lights process. I also want to be very clear with you, the two individuals that you heard there sharing about some of their experience in the One Acts network, to my knowledge, we've never seen them on a Sunday morning walk through our doors. They're very much part of First Church. I want to kind of lift that up for you. I want to give you some other examples of what this can start to look like, and each one of these is different. So this is a group, this is called Fit Faith, and yeah, it's kind of what it seems like. We have a gym here in town, and the owner was very gracious. It closes at 4 o'clock on Sundays, and she said to us, you can use this space at 4 o'clock if you want. And so Mitch helped pull this group together. And they would literally work out physically and then work out spiritually by getting together after the workout and having conversation around scripture, sharing, prayer, etc. Now, I will say to you, this is one of those groups that was for a season. This one is not going right now. But I want you to understand that, this was one of the first groups that came along that really helped our church start to have an understanding of what we're talking about. I should have put his picture in here, and I didn't. But I need to tell you, there was a gentleman who came out of this group. His name was Mylan, who was not a Christian. And Mylan came to the point of wanting to be baptized. And I was fully prepared to go there, where the picture where you see, and we were going to do a baptism there. But Mylan said, actually, when I was small, he literally had not stepped in a church for over 10 years. Was it? 14, thank you. 14 years, and the church had hurt him. And so when it came to the baptism and desiring to be baptized, for him, one of the elements of his own healing and journey and transformation, he says, I want to be baptized in the church proper, the attractional church, as part of my healing and new life and new birth. When he did that, it was on Christmas morning a couple years ago. That was a game changer for us in our culture, because for the first time, some of the people who came to our attractional settings were like, wait a minute, there might be something to this Fresh Expression thing, this Acts network. It really is reaching people for Jesus Christ. And so again, I should have put his picture in there, but even though this group isn't happening right now, I want you to hear that it's reaching and changing lives. So that's one example. Here's another one. That's some of the group that you just saw in the video. This is a Tuesday night group that meets. Now they're focused around a meal and different forms of praise and worship. And sometimes the message is a video clip from Sunday morning from one of our sermons. Sometimes it's a scripture passage they reflect on. Sometimes it's the theme that we worked with during the week, and they do it in their own way. They do all kinds of things there. Here's another one. I'm just going to show you this. This is a very raw, okay? This wasn't polished. So Mitch and this guy Alec doing a rugby Fresh Expression, and they put this out on both our church Facebook, but in general to other rugby players. Just keep that in mind while you watch it, all right?
Hey, Johnny! Right. Yeah, hey, First Church. I'm here with Alec Egerton, and we're asking for your prayers today. We are starting a Rugby Acts network group. Right on. People are starting to roll in. We just got done with our devotion, and we're looking forward to sharing the love of Jesus Christ with rugby players. Yeah. And so if you will please pray for us, And if you have any interest in checking out some rugby and joining in and seeing a church form on the rugby field, this is where we're going to be.
Yeah, and if you like hitting people and you love people and you love Jesus, then hop on down. We're trying to go every Friday for the next coming few weeks, and based off the interest we gauge, move forward, you know what I mean, and start hitting some other people and
loving
spreading
people.
The love all across. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right. Loving people. That's right. All right, praise God.
Right on. Now we got to end it.
I don't know
What's
how
up, guys? We're just trying to figure out how to end this video. We're trying.
Hold on, maybe this.
Finish!
I realize rugby is not for everyone. That's okay. Remember, Fresh Expressions, reading the context we're in, getting into those niches in society is really what they are focused on. So that's an example. Here's another one that you see up here behind me. We've just recently, in the last couple of months, started a yoga church form, and there we are in action. And what's really cool in this story is the leader of this particular group, her name is Hannah. And Hannah's one of the few people that Mitch, who will be up here in just a few minutes, didn't go out and recruit. She heard about Fresh Expressions. There's enough happening in our culture that she proactively came to him and said, this is something I think I can do. She's been a college student, and to hear some of her story and her own transformation of how she's becoming a leader in faith has been wonderful and inspiring for us. This one is it was a hiking one. This is one of our very first ones. This one is not happening right now. It was one of the very first ones that we had of people literally getting outside and learning to worship in different ways. And it's a wonderful thing to go through the Psalms especially and literally be in nature, where when you're talking about the splendor of God, you're experiencing that firsthand. So that was one. Here's another one that's going on right now among some of our young adults, and kind of a game night kind of thing, that is happening. And one that we'll talk about more later today is this one. There's one happening right now, literally right here at the Pajama Factory on Monday evenings. And we're going to talk about that one later, so I'm going to skip over most of that one for now. But these are just some of the pictures of what's happening. We have a Monday night dinner, not actually in this space, it's kind of across the way and upstairs, but that just gives you an idea. So those are just some of the ones that are starting to happen here or are happening here. And again, I share those with you not to say, hey, do it this way, but to say what might be possible in your setting with people and their giftings, their passions, in the context that they are. So here's what I want to do as we wrap up our time here this morning. I just want to remind you of this. This is not a program or a fad. There's strong scriptural support to be living in this direction. And what I want to ask you to do, it's not long, it's 5 verses. With one voice, can we read together these 5 verses? Could you join with me in that? So let's read it. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their home, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Thank you. I had read this passage for many, many years. Here's how I read it. If you go to the second paragraph there, I read it this way. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. But it says they met in the temple courts, and then where does it say they met? In their homes. They're worshiping in their homes. They're worshiping in places other than the temple space. And then when you look at the life of Jesus, who at times taught and preached at the temple space or synagogue space, but then also was at the well and at the wedding and at the beach and in their homes and all of these other places, I'm like, it's right there. And so the result of that, I think, to really be the church that God calls us to be is to live into this kind of model where, again, one is not better than another, But we're going to keep on meeting on Sunday mornings, and we're going to keep on trying to engage people where they are. But my goodness, we are also going to try to get to those third space places in homes and in social areas where people come together and do whatever we can to meet them on their turf and love them incarnationally, just like Jesus did with us. And so increasingly in my setting, this is the image that we use. The idea of the DNA of the double helix, where there's the one strand of the gathered church and the one strand of the sent church, and they're both held together by the love of Christ. So dual elements, but one church. And that's incredibly important to me, and hopefully for our people, they're increasingly learning to embrace that. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this here this morning. I've already mentioned this to you. We've already talked about the importance of context. But here's what I want to remind you of this morning. Imagine again that you were a 1950s person and you wanted to sell, and you are selling music. Imagine if one day somebody came in and what did you, if you wanted to sell music after the record player, what came along next? You can see it right there. Yeah. Imagine if you'd have been a 1950s record owner and be like, you know what, people don't love music anymore. They're turning to these 8-tracks. I am not going to sell 8-tracks. I'm only going to keep selling my records. If you would have done that, what would happen to your business over time? Right, obviously would have gone down. Imagine that you're selling the 8-tracks and that's going really well, but then what comes after the 8-tracks? Cassettes. I still remember as a kid, I thought it was so great when you could push the button, it would zip forward or zip behind, like that was off on my little Walkman, you know? What if the 8-track person would have been like, you know what, people don't love music anymore. They're buying cassettes instead. Is it that people have quit loving music? Or is it just the form in which they are connecting with the music is changing? I would argue with you that people love music as much today as they ever have, but they listen to it in forms totally different than, again, 1950. Or, when I was growing up, if you wanted to watch a movie, you went to a store on the corner. Does anybody remember what it was called? Blockbuster, thank you. Did you know that Blockbuster a number of years ago had an opportunity to buy this little thing that nobody had ever heard of called Netflix? They had a chance to buy it for $50 million, and Blockbuster said no. They said it's a fad that will pass. They said we literally, because with all the buildings, we literally have the corner market on this medium. Netflix is never going to work. Well, we know what happened. Blockbuster no longer exists. And last time I checked, it keeps changing. Netflix today is worth around $70 billion. What happened? They weren't reading their context. It's not that people wanted to quit watching movies, it's how they were watching them that changed. It's not that people today don't want to worship anymore, it's how they're going to worship and be engaged that matters and is different. So I want us to understand that, but I want to come back to this for just a moment. Right now, according to various statistics, 20% of people will come to our church on a Sunday morning if we invite them. So please hear that. I'm sorry, 20 will come on their own. So we don't have to do anything different. 20% of the population is going to come to church on Sunday morning. Another 20% will come if we invite them. Now, please hear that. That's a large number of people that if we just intentionally invited them, they're going to come. Are we inviting them? There's another 20% out there who say they come to church, but they don't. We jokingly call them members. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But there's another 20% that will say, hey, we belong to a church, but you don't ever see them on Sunday morning. That's 60%. The last 40% will never come through our doors, no matter what we do. I don't know about you. I'm not okay with just saying, the heck with you 40%. That's almost half the population. A church cannot be okay with just saying, the heck with 40% of the population. A couple other statistics for you to be aware of. Right now, 1 out of 4 people have no connection with church, and they never did. So they didn't even grow up with like Vacation Bible School. Like there's never been a connection in their life there. 38% of individuals in our culture right now maybe grew up in the church but are no longer connected. They would be called post-Christian. That number goes all the way up to 48% of individuals under the age of 30. Now, I don't know about you. I can give you those numbers and you might be like, oh, that's too bad. man, I wish that wasn't the case. But then it probably moves right on. So let me tell you what that means. According to those statistics I just gave you, at least one of my 3 kids will not know the thing I've given my life to, the thing that I live for, the thing that changed my life. 1 out of 3. And more often, more likely than that, 2 out of the 3 will not know the love and the grace and the beauty of Jesus found in the church. And let me tell you, I'm not okay with that. And I pray that there will be a church that says, I'll come to your kids, Matt. I'll meet them on their turf, and we'll do whatever we can to love them. These are your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews and your friends. This is not a head information thing. This is not a program thing. This is a love thing. And unless our hearts yearn for the 40% who aren't there, unless our hearts break for those who are playing church and not being church, we're not going to make very much progress. So this whole thing about Fresh Expressions, please do not hear it as another new thing. I am praying that it is a way for the church to be the church to reach these kids, my kids. And I pray that you feel that way as well.